Second Meetinghouse.
Now this building is just a replica. It's a replica of the 1857 Meeting Hall. Now as I said, when James and I moved to Battle Creek in 1855, the congregation was meeting in the Hewitt home. Well, when they came, they brought the Review and Herald staff with them. So they immediately had to build a new meeting hall. And so they built one in 1855 that would seat 40 people. And that lasted for 2 years. It was too small. So they had to build a second one. Now this was built on the same dimensions as that second one, and it was built to seat 300 people. Now as you look around it, do you think we could get 300 people in here today? We had 150 in here in April, and we had to actually have extra chairs here. So I don't know how they got 300 in here.
They were skinny.
And then they probably didn't stretch out like we do like today. Well, that meeting hall lasted for 10 years, and then it became too small. So they sold it to the African Methodist Episcopal Church down the road, and they built a third one that would seat 700 people. But because so many things happened important in that second meeting hall, when they wanted to replicate a building on site, they figured, let's build a second meeting hall. But of course, after 130 years, the African Methodist Episcopal Church had done so much remodeling on it, we didn't know what the inside looked like anymore. We had a picture of the outside that had the 2 doors and the 1 window. And then we had, down the side, we knew there was 4 windows. And then by description, we knew that there should be 2 more windows here at the front. Well, they figured the only place they'd find a building to match that description would be go to the northeast part of the United States. And incredibly, up in a town called Borderville, Vermont, they'd found an Adventist church that was constructed in 1864 that matched that description. So the ministry sent their architects up there, and they drew up plans for this building, and in 1998, Maranatha International built this building on this site. Now, how many of you are familiar with Maranatha International? How many of you are familiar with the $10 church project? All right, this is the only church built in the United States with the $10 church project. All the rest of them are outside the United States. And there's a reason. You'll catch on to that later on. Well, also in 1998, that Borderville, Vermont church disbanded. So the benches you're sitting on, the pulpit, the pump organ, and the 10 Commandments come from that 1864 Borderville, Vermont church. Now the benches wouldn't have been this comfortable in 1864. The pads are added for your comfort. But as I said, many important things happened in that second meeting hall. In 1858, Ellen White gave her first public testimony on her Great Controversy vision. Now that vision had lasted 2 hours. Her testimony that May day took over 10 hours. Now she started in the morning with Satan being expelled from heaven. She spoke until lunch, when Christ had been crucified on the cross. At that time, one of the elders came up to her and whispered, "Mrs. White, it's time to break for lunch." She replied, "But I've only just begun." But she did break for lunch. In the afternoon, they had 2 other sermons. They also had a baptism. But people had came to see and hear Mrs. White. So at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, she started on the second half of the Great Controversy testimony, from Jesus raising from the tomb until the second coming. By the time she finished, it was 10 o'clock at night. James White was tired. He wanted to go home. So he invited the people to go home. They didn't want to. They wanted to give public testimony. So one by one, they would stand up and give their public testimony. 5 times within the next hour, James White tried to encourage him to go home. They didn't want to. They wanted to give public testimony. Finally, at 11 o'clock, he says, "I'm going to give everybody a chance to testify. All those that want to testify of the Lord in His second coming, please stand to their feet." When the entire congregation rose in unison, James White gave the benediction, and he sent them home. That's the only way they would go. 1859, systematic benevolence, the forerunner to tithing, was adopted in the second meeting hall. Up until that point, ministers just got paid whatever a church would give them. After that, they made $7 a week. Probably still a pretty good wage in 1859. October the 1st, 1860, the name Seventh-day Adventist was chosen in the Second Meeting Hall. There was a man by the name of David Hewitt, the most honest man in Battle Creek, that nominated that name. 1861, the Review and Herald Publishing Association was organized, and also the Michigan Conference. The first local conference was organized in the Second Meeting Hall. There was a man by the name of Joseph Bates, elected first Michigan Conference president. Well, by 1863, there were 7 local conferences, and James White said, we need to have a general conference. We need to organize this church. You see, at that time, the Civil War was being fought. Adventist boys were about ready to be drafted into the military. They could not go in as conscientious objectors because there was no organization behind them. That is one of the main reasons why the General Conference was organized 150 years ago this year, in 1863. Now, for that first General Conference, they had 20 delegates. They represented the 3,500 members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church at that time. 3 years ago in Atlanta, Georgia now. It's been 3 years. Wow, time's flying. They had another General Conference. They had 2,244 delegates, and they represented the 16,938,000 plus members of the Adventist Church just 3 years ago. Now, last year's numbers in April, 17,214,000. So we are growing as a denomination. But as I said, after 10 years, the Second Meeting Hall became too small. They built the third one. That third one lasted for 11 years. And then that one became too small. But instead of selling that one or tearing it down, what they did is they raised that one up, they rolled it across the street, they set it back down, and it became part of the Review and Herald. Part of the Review and Herald was burned down with John Kellogg's book on the press. But you four haven't heard that story yet. Well, in 1878, Battle Creek was the world headquarters of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. The Battle Creek Sanitarium was up and running, the Review and Herald was here, and they also held a yearly general conference. So it was decided that every Seventh-day Adventist around the world, 15,000 of them, should help fund and build the fourth meeting hall. And Edson White came up with this plan that if everybody gave 10 cents a month for a year, they could fund a new meeting hall. And it became known as the Dying Tabernacle for all those 10-cent pieces. And that's where Maranatha got their idea of the $10 church project. Well, that building would seat 3,200 people. It was the largest seating capacity building in Battle Creek at that time. Fully funded, right down to the hymnals and the pews, cost less than $27,000 to build. To replicate that building today would probably be $20 to $30 million. Well, the city of Battle Creek was so excited that the General Conference hadn't left, they agreed to fund the bell tower. With the understanding that if anything came to Battle Creek and they needed a large seating capacity building, they could go to the Dying Tabernacle. So throughout the years, there was probably some things that went in there that probably should not have gone in. But that's what happens when you make a deal. You have to uphold your end of the bargain or you're no better than the other guy. Well, the Dying Tabernacle never did become too small. But on a Saturday night in the winter of 1922, word spread around that the Dying Tabernacle was on fire. By the time people got back downtown, the Dying Tabernacle was destroyed. You see, back in those days, they didn't put fire stops in buildings. That fire continued to burn until all the fuel was gone. And that fuel was the Dying Tabernacle. Now, the current tabernacle, built on the same site as the third meeting hall and the Dying Tabernacle, seats about 1,100 people, was dedicated in 1926. We refer to it as the Tab. Now here's where we put our plug in for our village. If your church would like to come here and hold church services, either in this building or in our Parkville church, we would love to have you come and bring your whole church. Now, yeah, Brazil is a little bit far, but we do have a church coming from Brazil next April that will be doing that. Tennessee's not that far. You can come up here, hold church services. Massachusetts isn't that far. Forgot about them. Not yesterday, but the Sabbath before, we had 2 churches that held services in here together, and we had 2 churches holding church services in the other building together. We love having churches come here and hold church services. They come here, they spend the day, they bond together as a family, and they learn about their history. Now, we've also had some unique things in here. In April of this year, the General Conference held their spring session in here. So we had 150 leaders from all over the world that were in here. Speakers we had that day were Bill Knott, Merlin Burt, Pastor Ted Wilson, can't even remember them all, David Trim. We had 8 seminars in here, very good stuff. Also last fall, Mark Finley came through here holding with a group, and so he held a church service in here. Another function of this building is we held a wedding in here last October. It was an older couple. They both lost their spouses 18 months earlier, so or Before that, they met each other, fell in love. They got married on October the 21st in here. Woke up on October the 22nd. We hope it wasn't a great disappointment. We also had 5 baptisms just up behind Mrs. White's house earlier that month. So, you know, if your church wants to come here and hold some special time, just let us know and we'll help you make the arrangements for that. Also, if you have a spare week, spare weekend, spare month, or spare 3 months, and you'd like to come volunteer here in the village, this is how this village functions. We love to have volunteers come. We have housing, bring your food, your clothes, come here, help around the village, learn the tour, and meet people from all over the world. And I mean literally all over the world. All right, shall we go see if James Hall might have home?